etched into my memory from that TV is watching The Miracle of Life. That's the only thing I remember watching.
Oh, dude, grade 11 biology class.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome back to the Behind the Screen podcast, which you can now find on Spotify. I am joined here once again by my good friend and former classmate, Connor.
I'm back, baby.
I'm back, and we're not back in school, but it's that time of the year. Kids are going back to school, both in class and virtually. And while a lot of films have that coming of age spirit, we're going to be focusing a lot more today on these back to school movies.
Back to school. Back to school.
Despite the generation that the film came from, films about school share this underlying theme about being seen as unique, but accepted by your classmates, your teachers, and your friends. And we're going to look at some of the most popular films of the decades and compare the values being taught and how they evolved over the years. Because they've been making films about school since
school existed.
Exactly. I know since sliced bread, but school's not the best thing since sliced bread. It's prison for children, but...
You know who didn't go to school? Those kids in The Witch.
You know who didn't go to school? Quentin Tarantino. He went to the movies, okay? And I just want to start with a little documentary that we both watched in film school, 7 Up. It's a documentary series that started in the 1950s that followed a group of kindergarten children every 7 years, and you got to watch them grow old. And they just put out a new piece, again, every 7 years. And for the first couple of episodes of this documentary series, you can see these black and white videos of these kids, you know, from 1950s saying they want to be an astronaut, and they follow them to the 70s, and, you know, and they're a garbage man now, but they still got that moxie, you know?
I think I was asleep for that one.
Okay.
I did watch Frederick Wiseman did the documentary High School in I think 52 or something
really?
like that. He followed it up in the 80s, but it's like very like cinema verite, fly on the wall sort of thing.
About kids going to high school and just hanging out.
Yeah, and it's like kids in the principal's office, and it's really great.
See, that's the thing we're talking about too, because as you watch these old movies and kind of like Rebel Without a Cause, you know, going to the principal's office, no matter what year it is, it's always a funny circumstance to happen. Marching down to the principal's office, whether you're buddy with him or he bites off everyone's heads, that's a main thing that everyone can relate to. And again, going as far back as you said 1950, like going down to the principal's office. I don't know about your school, but whenever someone was called down to the office, you do the ooh, like every time, dude. Like, that's the point of it.
I don't think they had the resources at my school. They just made kids sit in the hall. So you're just alone in the hall.
I've been kicked out of class a couple times and just sat and listened to the rest of like the 4th grade division lesson outside in the hall.
You want to get set down to the big boss, you're going to have to put like gum in someone's hair or something.
Exactly. And let's start off with the 1970s of movies. And this starts off with one of your favorite movies, The Last Picture Show.
Last Picture Show. We're talking about this again.
We gotta get a counter for how many times we talk about this on this podcast.
Last Picture Show is about school-age children, teenagers, but I feel like it focuses on like the outside of their school more so. Like, sure, there's like the teachers.
Right. So I haven't seen this movie, but there are a couple on this list that I do consider school movies, despite the fact that the school portion is done relatively quickly. I mean, we'll see films later on, but Superbad's an example where they're really only in that school for about 15, 20 minutes.
They establish like these kids are going to class.
Exactly.
They have a couple classes. There's the smart aleck teacher, the cool teacher, the mean teacher.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's slasher movies that take place in, you know, high schools and whatnot, but we're kind of focusing on the ones that kind of make us reminded about going back to school. Like, even if it was in the movie for a couple of minutes, like some of these are such distinct school movies. And we got movies like Animal House. We got movies like Grease and Carrie and 16 Candles and American Graffiti. You know, these are like raw, emotional, classic staples of not just cinema, but high school movies in general that we're still seeing parodied to this day.
Yeah, and I think the films we're going to talk about are, I mean, all films are escape and wish fulfillment, but these school movies especially, it seems like these directors are going back to what they had experienced in high school and massaging it into something that they wanted to happen, whether it's embarrassing, whether it's funny. It's often emotionally cathartic for these creative people to go back and kind of revise maybe a not so exciting or fulfilling childhood.
See, that's what's really interesting to me, because looking at a lot of these movies on the list, you kind of get to thinking, we'll talk about this later on with Linklater, but some of these people must have either had like the coolest childhoods ever, and that's why they can emulate such perfect high school experiences, or maybe they didn't even go to school at all, but somehow they can still capture that wonderful energy that being in school entails without them being in school at all.
Maybe I'm projecting here, but I think maybe like a lot of these people like feel like they maybe missed out on some like essential part of their like teenage years, and they that's what makes them so creative. They can go back and make this world that didn't exist for them.
Well, a lot of the movies on this first list for the 70s, they take place within the same era, but Grease is a movie from the 70s that's about the 50s, correct?
Sure.
I am terrible.
People tell me.
I am terrible at these movies that take place in. I always get. I thought Grease was from the 50s, despite John Travolta being in it. I thought that Christmas movie was also from like the 60s, the one that's from the 80s that's very popular.
I thought Dazed and Confused and Fast Times at Ridgemont High came out in like the same couple years.
Exactly, and well, Dazed and Confused especially, but. In every generation, we see these movies where they're portraying a different time period and not just the one that they're in themselves. And we see like all sorts of different things. We see horror movies with Carrie. We see fanaticism, Freaky Friday, fantasticism.
I don't know. It's not fanaticism.
We even have movies like Animal House that are strictly school movies, but they elevate the amount of partying that took place in these movies. And we start to see the trend of much older actors playing these high schoolers. Some of these movies have like major star power with Travolta, Spacey, and Belushi. Just to cap this off, so many of the movies from this time period have huge cult followings behind them. Stuff like Grease. Like I've never gone to see Grease because I just don't want to have to endure Grease in a theater, you know?
I went and saw Aladdin once. Musicals are not for me.
So we get to the 80s, and with the coming of 1980s high school movies, we start to see a split in the stories being told. Half of the zany 80s high school movies introduce an element of the surreal. So we start to see movies like Back to the Future, Bill and Ted, and what I just rewatched the other day for like the millionth time, Weird Science, man.
Weird Science. You love Weird Science. It is probably one of my least favorite John Hughes movies. I think just Ferris Bueller and The Breakfast Club are so strong and their characterization is so good, and then Weird Science is just so pervy. It's so pervy.
But that's the thing, though. Like
that's like horny 14-year-old me was like, what if this girl in the magazine?
Yeah.
What if she could be real? And it's just like so like 80s like subliminal fear. Like there's the giant like ICBM like coming through the house, and like his brother turns into that weird like gremlin creature.
It's like a poop monster or something. And here's the thing, though. The 80s has the complete opposite ends of all these movies. Like take a movie like Porky's that came out in 1981. That's a bit more of the, you know, Animal House craziness, frat boy woo-woo culture. Versus something like, you know, we've had like The Karate Kid come out in 84, The Breakfast Club. Like these are such chill, calm high school movies that it's kind of shocking that they all came out within like such a tight time span of each other. It kind of seems like so many of these movies took this like crazy fantasticism and elevated it, you know?
Just stop saying the word.
Ferris Bueller's your favorite movie of all time, right?
It's in my top 5 for sure. It's the movie I've seen one of the most times.
That was a movie that they would bring in on the old VHS TVs in high school when it was a rainy day.
They'd wheel in the death stand that could have fallen on you at any time.
Hey, there's straps. They had straps on there, and they pop in either Dante's Peak or they would pop in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and those were our two choices every rainy day.
What's etched into my memory from that TV is watching The Miracle of Life. That's the only thing I remember watching.
Oh, dude, grade 11 biology class.
Yeah.
What's funny enough, too, is that I don't think there's any movie on this list that has a sex ed scene in it that kind of emulates that.
Oh, I don't know. I think Gremlins has a sex ed scene. Maybe I'm wrong.
Oh, maybe. Because, yeah, that is another movie that has
like
a couple
showing
scenes in high school.
About like very scientifically accurate.
And the other half want to do this like more true to heart experience about like what actually going to school is like. The Karate Kid, Ferris Bueller, Even though Ferris Bueller's a bit more, again, they're stealing cars, they're running all over the city.
Yeah, like I think there's a big difference between like something like Weird Science, where it's like straight up fantasy sci-fi, or Back to the Future, where it's like heavy sci-fi, and something like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where it's like it's improbable that he stole
a car, developed a program that could hack in and change all this stuff. But
and all these people are rallying around him, and like people have said, oh, maybe it's his fever dream or whatever.
Let's save Ferris.
Let's not get into that. Let's not get into that. But it's plausible. And like Breakfast Club, I was thinking about today, and I'd say that's one of the movies that really, really cemented like the nerd, jock, rich girl, weirdo,
the
rebel
ensemble
stereotype. And the whole point of the movie is that it's like trying to subvert these stereotypes to say we're more than these labels. But in doing so, it cements these labels.
Well, I mean, you just quoted the ending of the movie, right? Where they're like, we're just a nerd and a girl. And a burnout.
No, the letter at the end is like saying we're so much more than that, because they've like
breezed through
they've had all these deep conversations, and if everybody could just talk it out, things would be better.
So specifically with that film in general, it's been getting a lot of heat recently about what its actual values and messages are that carry through to the film, because people do argue that Breakfast Club and a couple more of these films in the 80s, it's kind of the let your hair down, take off your glasses, you can be more than who you are, changing the nerdy girl into a hot girl kind of vibe.
The stuff with Ali Sheedy is like doesn't hold up to like modern values, but I think like just in terms of like being open with other people,
and I see that as more as like being friendly to someone than like trying to like change. Like it's more like let me invalue some of my favorite things upon you and vice versa.
Yeah, no, I got that from that movie as well, and like obviously Weird Science is problematic. And then like
because of Robert Downey Jr.
And then like 16 Candles, super problematic in parts as well. Ferris Bueller, I don't remember there being anything that's like super like ooh.
He took over a freaking parade by himself.
Yeah, no, that's just badass. Like that holds up.
Drink some Pepto-Bismol, get out of here.
But yeah, I don't know. It was the 80s.
And again, capping off the 80s, Dead Poets Society in 89. Like, we're really starting to get these movies that are...
We're capping off the 80s without talking about Fast Times?
Okay, here's the thing.
Pump the brakes.
Here's the thing about this episode. There's a million movies we're going to miss today, okay? I guarantee you that there's a zillion...
I'm sorry.
There's a high school of that... I don't even think I have... What's the musical Disney movie about basketball?
I don't care what the Disney movie about basketball is. I care that we're just breezing through Fast Times at Ridgemont High when Spicoli solidified the surfer, stoner, slacker archetype.
You wouldn't say that was Bill and Ted?
No.
Okay. So... what we're seeing with the 80s is that it was kind of a thing where people were elevated by their stereotypes a lot of the time, but at the same time trying to play down stereotypes too. Because some of these films, you have like, look at Karate Kid, right? You have Ralph, you have the main guy, and he's totally normal. But then the bullies are so over-exaggerated and like super evil that you don't really get any of these movies that are 100% kind of true to real life. You always have these Stephen King-esque bullies that just come out of nowhere and like completely beat the snot out of you.
No, and I think like exploring these archetypes like is valuable because you can reveal a lot of truths that you otherwise wouldn't.
Mm-hmm. So what do you got to say about Fast Times?
Fast Times, man. It's what Fast Times has that I compare Dazed and Confused and Fast Times a lot because I watched them around the same time. I think I had a DVD that was like a double feature.
Yeah, there must be some double feature. I thought the movies were the same movie for like a long time too for some reason.
But Fast Times is like a hangout movie up until like there's that whole like pregnancy scare, like abortion thing, and then it's like I feel like this is like a hangout movie that gets super real really quickly. And even with like Spicoli, like he's seemingly like immune to like all the other social pressures that the characters are under.
Yeah.
But then at the end he's like flunking out of school, and it's like being a slacker like does have this impact on him.
You know what? Funny that you mentioned that movie too. It's getting a second resurgence right now because they just did the Zoom reunion. And Shia LaBeouf played Spicoli.
Yeah, well, those people are late to the party.
The internet's blowing up with all these images of Shia LaBeouf. And I'm like, you guys didn't know about this little movie like 30 years ago, 40 years ago now?
No, for me, that's right up there with, for hangout movies anyway, that's up there with Dazed and Confused.
Well, here's the thing. You know, hangout movies, we haven't even discussed that yet this episode. So many of these freaking awesome movies are these ensemble hangout movies where...
Breakfast Club's a hangout movie.
Breakfast Club is a hangout movie. Ferris Bueller's a hangout movie. And what I love, my favorite genre of these are the hangout ensemble movies where there's just so many people always hanging out.
Yeah.
A lot of these movies focus on a handful of not even a handful of characters. There's 1 to 3 main characters. And I don't know about Fast Times. I can't really remember it, but was there a big group of people?
Oh yeah.
Fast Times all hanging out?
It's a big group of people. It's almost like just interwoven vignettes almost.
What I find interesting is that a lot of the more subdued films from the 80s have much more repeat value in watching them. Films like Breakfast Club and The Karate Kid I can watch over and over again, versus if I watch Bill and Ted, I need a good 3-month break from Bill and Ted, because these these fantasticism ones are so grand.
There's a lot of movies that are go down like candy, and they're so easy to watch the first time, but it's what brings you back into these movies is especially the hangout movies is being around these characters, it's all the characters are developed so well in Fast Times and Dazed and Confused that you want to be around these people, and it's that whole thing of building these parasocial relationships with the people on screen.
Yeah, we start to see these movies emulate what it's actually like going to a high school, and not Animal House, where it's the ideal version of these party schools where school's out for the summer plays.
Bro, none of these movies were like my high school.
Really?
I was miserable in high school.
Oh, I thought high school was the best time of my life, dude. It was so easy for me. It was just hanging out with your friends every day.
Did you peak in high school, Gordon?
Going to parties. Oh my god, I've probably peaked in grade 9, to be honest. That's how much fun I had in high school. We see things the fact that Karate Kid, dude, introduced a whole generation of young kids to karate. I did karate classes because I watched The Karate Kid nonstop. Did you do karate classes?
Yeah, I was.
Right? Everyone did.
I was a yellow stripe in Taekwondo.
Yep. I was too, and I quit because karate class was on at the same time as the famous Jet Jackson on Disney, and I could only do one. We get to probably the best decade for high school movies, the 90s. The 90s, interesting time for high school movies. We see a shift again, and all of a sudden we see way more rom-coms popping up about high school. Before, you didn't really have...
It's all about boys.
There were no real female-centric films about high school back then. And it wasn't even so much that the 90s became female-centric. It was more that they just became rom-com aspects where you can set this romantic relationship in a school, films like Never Been Kissed, 10 Things I Hate About You. You and I only know about Never Been Kissed because when you pop in the DVD for Fight Club, it's the thing that pops up to trick us. That's how we know about that movie.
I don't know, you still had, in the 90s, you had Clueless and The Craft.
Yeah, a bit more kind of mature, but again, these are the first time we're seeing these female-centric roles in these movies,
Yeah, but I still think, the portrayal of female characters in The Craft and Clueless, I watched The Craft pretty recently. It's very shallow.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's
base level kind of bullying and gossip.
It's base level, and I don't know, I think there's a lot of people that love those movies, and obviously they have a big cult following, but for me, the characterization just was not there yet, in movies it was in Booksmart and stuff like that came later.
We have these kind of comedies popping up too about high school. Clueless, She's All That, 10 Things I Hate About You. And probably the most important movie about high school that I would say for the 90s.
Election?
That's my favorite movie. American Pie. Let's be real. 1999, American Pie comes out.
I don't disagree with you that it was important for teen movies.
It perfected the genre on its first attempt, and it wasn't able... It peaked itself. That movie is so in the zeitgeist, dude. I remember kids in grade 6 were call me Stiffmeister. Everyone was watching American Pie somehow.
I think it was so popular with younger people because of its shock value, but I don't think it said anything real. And rewatching it as an adult, I'm this is bad, real bad.
Now here's the thing though, American Pie though, it wasn't overly raunchy, and it wasn't so bad in terms of the fact that they could get away with the R rating. It really felt like that the filmmakers restrained themselves to a competent place with that movie. And again, that movie was kind of ahead of its time, dude. It had plot points about webcam streaming on the internet. You look at me in the eyes right now and tell me you haven't looked at a pie different since watching that movie.
American Pie was one of those movies I wasn't allowed to watch,
which made us want to watch it 10 times more.
So like when my parents would go out, I'd be like, oh, like gotta get the VOD, like let's play it before they come home in an hour and 20 minutes. So I think there was a certain excitement around that, and there's definitely a nostalgia, but I think like
outside of the nostalgia, because we're 94 babies.
If I went back and watched it, I'd be like, oh.
That's true. Speaking of films that we went back and watched, though, I knew I had to watch this or else you would literally not show up for the podcast today. I watched Dazed and Confused for the first time last night. I was dazed and confused, and I watched Dazed and Confused. It's one of the best films of all time, dude. It is so funny.
You know how much that pains me that you just saw Dazed and Confused yesterday? Like,
and I was going to argue that I think that Superbad is the closest to my high school experience that I had, but Dazed and Confused follows that formula really, really surprisingly close. Dazed and Confused, last day of school, they all get out, they all go to parties, the party gets canceled, they have a bush party in the woods. You know, like, I literally can't believe that that's the exact same thing that we went through in high school.
It's a super simple plot.
So simple.
But there doesn't need to be one because the characters are so good.
Talking about hangout ensemble movies, dude, I can't pick my favorite group of, like, friends in that freaking movie. Ben Affleck? Ben Affleck's so funny in that!
That's... Whenever you spend time with a character in that movie, you're like, oh, like I just want to stay with this person.
Yeah, and I think in this movie, in terms of the timeline of movies, 1993 when this came out, I am shocked that this movie came out and that the ensemble is just so perfect even to today. Like the stuff they talk about in that movie is 100% relevant, except for the Matthew McConaughey stuff. It can be eased up a little bit.
Even though it was like technically like a period piece, like what, it was set in the 70s. Like
I couldn't even tell though.
No, it was so spot on. Like I said before, like I thought it came out around the same time as Fast Times. Like I thought it was like an early 80s thing.
Yeah, Linklater is kind of the king of these movies, it seems, later on.
Dazed and Confused was so ahead of its time in terms of like, there doesn't need to be like all these crazy things happening.
Yeah,
like
there's
it's
no
just
main
like
characters really.
It's
like
such subdued comedy, and you just want to hang out with these people.
Yeah, you're in it for the ride. And again, this is one of those movies where the high school's only in it for like 20 minutes at the beginning. But like
school's out for summer.
It's so memorable as a high school movie. Like them asking their teacher to get out, to leave early in the class, and the teacher's like, man, let me tell you what my sergeant told me. 50 men are coming with me. 23 guys are going home. And like, that's it.
I forgot about that. I might play ball, but I'll never sign this paper.
There's so many great little bits, especially in the high school part where they're walking around the halls and just trying to get the attention of people in the classrooms. It's like, that's all we did in high school, just like roam the halls.
There's such love that went into this movie, and it's just...
It's crazy that, again, I want to think, did Richard Linklater just have an awesome teenage childhood?
I think Linklater's the exception. Like, dude's from Texas. Like,
oh yeah, he partied hard.
He definitely just did this up.
There's so many high school movies from the 90s that are just so unique and just so brilliant. I mean, Scream. Come on. Scream and The Faculty are two fantastic horror movies.
I've never seen Scream, Gorian.
Oh.
All I have is a screen cap of Drew Barrymore in my head. That's it. The Faculty, though, is on my list of kind of like
phenomenal movies.
No.
What? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I had it in there with like kind of like you didn't try that hard to make this a good movie.
No, but that movie came off like very edgy, and I kind of liked that. It was kind of over the top, but everyone was over. Even the nerds were kind of like mean to everyone, so everyone kind of was like leveled off for me.
Just the vibe of it for me was like a watered down Freddy versus Jason.
Yeah, especially because I saw it the other day. But again, the 90s, we had movies also like Election, which is one of the first movies we have on this list that I put in a kind of separate genre for high school movies.
First of all, you cast Broderick as a teacher in this genius, clearly inspired by Ferris Bueller's Day Off movie. And what I love about Alexander Payne, his scripts are just like every single character fits like a perfect little piece of the machine. Yeah. Even the janitor is like
everyone has a role.
The key to like the undoing.
And here's the thing about Election that, again, with all the other movies we talked about today, I haven't seen a film similar to this. It's the first film that incorporates a teacher into the plot of the teenage movie. So there's, again, it takes place at a high school, but you're following the teacher this time as opposed to a group of kids all the time. You're following Matthew Broderick, but you're also following Reese Witherspoon a little bit. You're following a couple of the other people, but it's kind of interesting, much like when you're going to school and you see a teacher outside of class, you're kind of like, oh my God, Miss Walton, what are you doing here? Like, I thought you lived at the school and slept in the second grade classroom. You know?
And like Broderick's character is like so sad and like pessimistic that it's like
relatable. Yeah, I know what you mean.
This whole this whole different framing device for a school movie instead of like this idealist like, oh, I think I'm in love. Like he's just trying to get through the day.
I've had nightmares where it's just the shot of
where
him
you're a teacher,
where the bee stings him and he's looking up at them, and it's just the grossest looking face that Matthew Broderick is, and it just keeps zooming into like his like grotesquely puffed up face. And even the end of that movie, I relate to so hard, where he moves to a different city and he sees her, and you know what? He's gonna let it go. He's letting it all behind, and he throws his milkshake at her because you can never let things go.
No. And the scene where like there's the Mexican standoff scene where they're all looking at him faster and faster, and you see all their faces like a carnival carousel.
And then it cuts to his gross face, and it's like a jump scare. It's literally a jump scare. And yeah, so we see this movie that takes place from the point of the teacher, which we haven't really seen in a lot of these high school movies, it seems like. Again, a lot of the time they're just focusing on the kids going through, but I love these little.
It's an interesting subversion because, like in Fast Times, like the teachers are like not to be trusted. Like you've Mr. Hand, who's just basically a fascist, and I don't know, like all these teachers are just terrible, like out of touch, everything wrong with the world. Whereas Election puts us in the shoes of like a very relatable character.
Again, yeah, maybe the students aren't as believable, but like in Election, the adults come across as very believable to me.
Yeah, it's a school movie like for adults.
Exactly. The 2000s were a strange mix for high school movies, and we saw people getting tired of the same old tropes as early as 2001 with Not Another Teen Movie, which I think is a phenomenal spoof movie, but just commenting on, again, what so many of these teen movies did. The fact that it's called Not Another Teen Movie, so many rom-com-y teen girl movies came out in the 90s that they just needed to be mocked. They needed to be made fun of.
Maybe I'm just a hater, but I think there's much more intelligent ways to like spoof these movies and subvert them and make them into something more interesting. Whereas like Not Another Teen Movie was just like pure like schlock slapstick.
I thought it was shock slapstick, but I do think that they made some pretty good comments on just the whole genre itself, you know? Because the genre is so stupid that you can only really mock it as stupid as the genre itself.
I don't know. I think in terms of this movie specifically, it's really easy to mock something, but it's harder to kind of parody it and make something more interesting than that movie.
But it was the first parody of high school movies, though, so we got to give it that. Right? There's nothing.
Is that a fact? Are we fact checked on that?
Let me check. Yes, that was. I'm 100% correct, dude. And despite it like perfectly nailing high school movies coming out, there's still films that came out after this movie that still pulled the same tropes. And despite this, we saw films that use the same tropes over and over again. And it wasn't until Mean Girls came out that it took the trope of like the mean stuck-up girls that were like in every single one of these movies, and it subverted it. It actually gave a plot to everything happening in the movie, you know? And while on surface, it looks super stereotypical, but like I think we've gotten to the point past where we're like, Mean Girls is actually a better movie than you think it is. It's like everyone knows Mean Girls is like this hilarious Tina Fey written comedy in a high school.
I think Mean Girls, its strength is that you think it's going to be one of those movies when watching it for the first time, and it's so much more.
Right. Because again, it was like 2010, 2005 where they're like, you got to watch this movie, you got to watch this movie. Now it's like, I know Mean Girls. I've seen it like 4 times.
Have you seen Pulp Fiction?
We saw reinterpretations of genres coming up with films like Napoleon Dynamite.
Man,
it's another great example of taking a beaten to death trope and applying this new foundation for it. Because, man, the idea of a slacker and just like, I don't know where, rural Idaho, like rural Utah.
Yeah.
It's like the funniest thing ever.
I saw Napoleon Dynamite probably before like any other coming of age. I saw this before like any John Hughes movie. I think I was like 11 years old, and this thing like changed my life.
Did you get the movie and / like it? And then like
I don't know if I got it, but it hit me in such a strong way. I was like, there's no other movies like this.
Yeah.
Because like before that I was like watching like Jurassic Park and stuff, and then this was just like left field out of nowhere, and I think it was like that for everybody. Gosh. Yours is better than mine.
Yeah. The idea of the slacker being in a rural state, super funny. And what?
Rural state.
And here's the thing. This is another one of those movies that has entered the zeitgeist of films. Like, people were doing Napoleon Dynamite impressions for years.
It's so wholesome, man. It's so wholesome and it's so funny.
And it is one of those zeitgeist things where no one really remembers what happened to John Heater. Like, no one really remembers what happened to John Heater, but all they know is that, what's the myth about Napoleon Dynamite? Like, they stopped him on the road and were like, do you want to be in a movie for $10,000 or something crazy like that?
Yeah, no, that's
Snopes. It's not true. Fake news.
I Snopesed it right now. I'm real quick with the Snopes. No, I mean, they made a short film that was like 10 minutes long in black and white.
He buys the wig.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
Yeah, and I think like the movie was so good, like John Hader doesn't need to be in any other movies. He's just a voice actor now, and he's chilling because he knows he's made a cultural phenomenon and he can sleep well at night.
And you will definitely see vote for Pedro shirts until the day you die. One of literally the only animated example, save for maybe some in the 2010s, of a high school kind of kids movie, and it's Recess School's Out, and it's the only one I can think of, but I'm so crazy nostalgic about this because I'm pretty sure it was the first movie I saw. It came out in 2001. It's based off the TV show. It's kind of like always been thought of as like a TV movie, but like, dude, that movie brings me to like tears when I watch it. Are you familiar with the plot?
I'm familiar with Recess, the show. I did not know they made a movie.
So the plot of the movie is that for the summer vacation after grade 4, everyone goes away to different things except for TJ. He's stuck by himself. We've all been there, right? Like your friends go to summer camp.
That's a good plot.
Dude, and they play 1 as the loneliest number when he's walking home.
How did they get that?
And then what ends up happening is he's walking by the school and he sees like a giant contraption come out of the school and shoot the moon. And it's the school. The school board's trying to make winter year long so that there's no more recess. So then TJ has to pull all of his friends out of their like freaking awesome camps that they're in and bring them back to, but it's all covert. Everything's covert. They're all living out of tree houses. They get the whole school involved. Dude, it's literally one of the coolest.
That's my ultimate grade 4 fantasy is living in a tree house or having a tree house.
Or like running around the school when it's like locked down and stuff like that. Like and again, Recess like nailed it. And I haven't seen a movie, let alone an animated one, that was that nostalgic for me. Because again, aside from everything that happens in that movie, there's nothing I can relate to more than being like stuck by myself for the summer. And you're
just like watching the grass grow.
Yeah, maybe we'll go for a bike ride, Franchises. Huge thing in the 2000s with these movies, man. Harry Potter and Twilight. Some of the biggest school-based franchises ever. And that was just a Harry Potter. Twilight, we're giving a thumbs up on because we love Robert Pattinson over here.
Yeah, you know what? If Twilight didn't exist, there'd be no good time. So
let's be real. I'd rather watch Twilight than like the first Harry Potter movie, just because of like the fun factor of watching those movies. I don't know. Harry Potter to me is kind of like,
I stopped watching Harry Potter after like Goblet of Fire because I'm just like, I was old enough to be like,
I thought I was too old for it right away, to be honest. Even
when they're making filler movies that cost hundreds of millions of dollars, I'm checking out.
That's fair. But you can't argue that those movies made you want to go to a wizarding school more than anything, especially with the release of like, they're making a Harry Potter RPG next year where you can be a wizard running around schools, That's all we wanted from these movies.
Yeah, where's my wand at? Yeah, so I think like by the 2010s, you had this perfect storm of cultural influence, and it allowed directors to like rehash and amend all these coming of age and school movies and these original yet familiar combinations.
Exactly. We start to see a lot more like true 100% to life, like factual experiences of what it's like to be in a real high school. No silly stoners, no goofy teachers. We have films like...
People got cell phones now.
Yeah, it's real. And you have films like Lady Bird in 8th grade that are being renowned for being these phenomenal, like true to heart experiences for these people that go to these schools and whatnot. I mean, it's kind of hard to relate to now because again, like I feel more disconnected to the internet than ever right now, like TikTok and all this other stuff that I can't imagine what it's like to go to school right now. And it's like all this virtual stuff and all this like social media being thrown at you,
No, I'm baffled whenever I'm out in public and I see people setting up their phone on a fire hydrant and doing a TikTok dance. I'm too old for that.
Yeah. And we also start to see, again, some movies that are true to life. Project X, right? When that movie came out,
Project X was my high school party
everyone,
movie. Because it dropped in 2012. I was in like 11th grade 12, and that was it, man. I was like, I just need one more blowout
just
like
one
this.
Project X party.
I need one Project X party before I get out of here.
The imitation parties that popped up where people were throwing like Project Z parties and all this crazy stuff happening.
You know a movie is good when the news is like, Project X is inciting riots in small town America.
The fact that at my local theater, they had a security guard hired for Project X that was patting down kids and IDing them to get into the theater, like at the doors for like the little theater, like they had people patting you down there. And then again, we have films like Booksmart, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, The Duff, like these really like
Me and Earl and the Dying Girl,
phenomenal,
so good. I
So
rewatched it recently. It's about like high school experience, creativity. It's about death.
It's about film that we love, you know.
It's about film. It's like a coming of age, Be Kind, Rewind sort of thing. Like they make
perfect.
all these little sweeted films, and I don't know. It like, man, the end of that movie made me feel things I didn't know were in there.
Yeah, and there's just again so many movies that came out. Everybody wants some. It Follows, Palo Alto, Kick-Ass. Like
who thought Everybody Wants Some was gonna be good? Nobody.
I thought it was gonna be. I thought the trailer looked fantastic, but you came at it after watching Dazed and Confused and stuff. So
I went and saw it at TIFF. Someone's like, "Oh, Linklater's got a new movie. Linklater's gonna be there." Someone got me tickets. I'm like, "Oh, this could be cool." Blew my mind.
It's one of my favorite movies of all time.
I agree.
With the 2010s and onwards, we start to see high schools as a bit more of a backdrop between characters at home doing their own thing than like causing trouble there. And again, we have so many, we didn't even touch on them this time, but TV shows that take place in high schools because it's so cheap to film in a high school for the summer.
Also didn't talk about It Follows, but that's cool.
Come on. We can't be here all day. And again, we just see some brilliant uses of radical plot devices that bring us to these schools. 21 Jump Street reboot, you know, brought us into the schools again. We have Project X. We have It Follows Unleashing Horror. Like, it seems like the 2010s...
It Follows is a better coming-of-age horror movie than Carrie. I'm saying it here because it's true.
The hot take-o-meter is going off the charts. And then we'll just end the aughts with Bad Education. 2020, it came out on HBO a couple months ago.
Yeah, you told me to watch that, and I was like, it might be okay. And then, man, shot so gorgeously.
Beautiful.
Hugh Jackman, like...
It's another one of those
knocked
movies
it out of the park.
Focuses on the teachers instead of the kids. And something actually happened like that similar to my school where like someone was embezzling like 40 grand that was supposed to be spent on like video gear. Like this stuff actually happens. And when it's true to life like this, like it's just so satisfying to watch. So what genres and tropes from these movies do we enjoy and hope to see more of? And what are we kind of like tired of seeing? Like, do we need to see any more cliche gay characters, stoner characters, jock characters?
I think a lot of these stereotypes are so broad that you can work really easily within them. Like the whole like stoner slacker character, I still think there's a lot of juice there. There's a lot of juice in so many of these archetypes because they're so old. So many of these archetypes just predate all these coming of age movies. They've been around forever.
Well, they had weed in the 70s. They have weed now. Like there's always going to be slacker types, you know, and that we're only just improving the kind of quality of these characters by subtly expanding them and just not making them like a one-note character.
Inherent Vice came out, and like that's like one of the first stoner detective movies. How come no one made a stoner detective movie before that? It's a perfect pairing.
It's called Pineapple Express, you dingus.
Those aren't detectives.
Do you like it more when everything kind of happens at the schools that these films are taking place in, or do you kind of like it when they escape campus for a little bit and kind of get away?
I think like it's pretty clear what we talked about today. It's just like all the fun happens between classes or when you're outside of class. None of these are focusing too heavily on being in class because that's really hard to make interesting because you have this like authority figure like making sure nothing cool happens, which I'm sure can be still subverted in some interesting way.
I mean, again, the scene where they're cooking in Superbad, and it's kind of just like the little montage of them cooking.
Exactly. You know, stuff like that, and
he's
it's
talking
hilarious.
to the teacher, and he's like, there's 3 more weeks in school left. When am I going to make tiramisu? Give me a break. Come on. I'm sorry for my language. Like, that is, like, I remember having, like, kids in class having conversations like that, where, like, kids would stand up in math and be like, why do I need to learn this right now? Like, I'm graduating in 3 weeks. Like, we had so many of these, like, slacker-esque characters, and, like, the teachers weren't teachers. Like, they were friends. Like, if you see a teacher in the hall, you gotta stop and chat with them. Or, like, you see
in
the
university, I told the professor, I asked them why we needed to learn MLA citation because I'd been learning it since the 9th grade. They didn't like that.
I'm a Chicago man. With the influx of technology and remote connectedness everywhere, would we rather see filmmakers try and tell school stories in the 2010s, or maybe try and do like kind of a period piece? Like, I guarantee you, dude, that next year someone's going to make a high school movie that's all on Zoom, and it's going to be terrible.
There's a lot of juice left.
There's a lot of juice left.
There's a lot of juice left in like the 2000s and probably the 90s too. I think at the same time though, like, it is like the duty of filmmakers to like create films of their time, and I think that's going to happen no matter what. Like, just because we don't really know what to do with cell phones on screen yet and how to handle them doesn't mean it's always going to be that way, because they're not going away, and they're not going away from film. We can't just make period pieces because we're uncomfortable with technology forever.
And we're starting to see the slow, subtle backtrack of the period piece with people like Jonah Hill, who are close to our age, you know, the 25 to 30-year-olds, that their period piece was mid-90s, you know? And I think that's what we're going to see in the coming years, where there's going to be films. God, I can't even believe I didn't put. Is The Social Network a school movie? Like, there's so many of these movies that you could classify it. And I think that
as soon as you as soon as you start going into university movies, it's wow. We really don't have time for this.
Rival university movie. There's a scene in the university at the beginning.
Teaching Assistant, the film.
Dude, and again, I didn't even mention any of like the inner city youth coaching / sports movies. Coach Carter.
We're the Titans.
Remember the Titans? Friday Night Lights.
Friday Night Lights was a show, right?
It was a movie first.
Oh.
Yeah. Can you think of any movies that you would watch as the year approached for school? I know that it doesn't have to be about a high school, but you know, whenever I start a new job, I watch Office Space and Clerks back to back. You know?
I used to watch Donnie Darko a lot.
Yeah,
in the fall.
Great high school movie.
I used to watch just recently. I watched It Follows because I love that movie, and it's like super fallcore. Like it's like,
dude, we gotta do a fallcore episode, please.
Yeah, like, just like, man, I have a whole folder in my computer. It's all fallcore movies. I'm not even joking.
I have a pumpkin themed table runner on my table right now.
I walked in here, it's like Martha Stewart did up the place.
I got mini pumpkins and a pumpkin spice candle going right now. It
smells like PSL heavy in here.
Well, do you think the kids are gonna have fun at school this year?
What? Oh, sorry, it disconnected for a second.
Can you turn your microphone on?
You can't eat on this Zoom call.
I don't know. Can you disconnect to the bathroom? I'm happy that I never have to go to school again ever in my life. Thanks so much for doing the podcast, Connor.
Thank you, Gorian.
Where can they find you?
They can find me at _Connor Reeves on Instagram and Connor_Reeves on Twitter. Thanks so much for having me.
What happened to your stingers? You had a bunch of stingers.
Oh yeah, just let me rhyme them
off.
Ladybird, a love letter to the hometown you hate. 8th grade. Is there a worse time to be a tween? It Follows, the best horror film of the 10s, elevates suburban horror and teen anxiety to levels untouched by Carrie.
That's just a compliment for It Follows.
It is.
Thank you so much for checking out the podcast. Leave a like and subscribe, and let us know what your favorite back-to-school movie is. Mine will forever be School of Rock. I am cool enough to be in the band.